Democracy. It comes from the Greek word demos kratos, which means power of the people. Democracy is a system of government that is fully controlled by the people. Most democracies in the world are indirect forms of democracy, which basically means people vote for representatives that will represent them in government. Also, most democracies in the world divide their powers into three branches: the executive branch, the judiciary branch, and the legislative branch. This is to help balance out power in a nation. Now, since I explained what a democracy is and what it has, I think it's time to give some historical examples, a couple of them. So let's go to that now. Alright, so a couple of early examples of democracy. So democracy is considered to be started in ancient Athens. The democracy they had at that time was a direct democracy. So people directly voted on new rules and new laws, and they also voiced their opinions sometimes in front of the ruler. However, the democracy they had at that time was a flawed democracy. This is because it didn't equally represent everyone. Women, children, slaves, and people with no land were not allowed to vote. A good democracy today would be one that represents. So that's why they had a flawed democracy. Another example of early democracy was in 1215 when the king signed the Magna Carta. This essentially stopped the king from having unlimited powers. It limited his powers, and from that day forth, he had to follow the rules in the Constitution. Now, an interesting question to explore is, how many democracies are there in the world? Well, let's search that up. It says here, where my pointer is pointing, that there is 123 democracies in 2013. Considering that there is nearly 200 countries in the world, that means the majority of countries agree with a democracy. Let's see some negatives of democracy now. So it's on this site, and we're gonna scroll all the way here to the disadvantages. So the first disadvantage that is listed here is misplaced trust. This is basically telling us that after the election, when citizens are basically almost powerless, they are forced to trust their elected officials into doing the right thing. Sometimes they may have ulterior agendas they may fail, and citizens are powerless to stop them. The second negative that's listed here is majority rules. This is basically telling us that the minority, regardless of how serious their issues are, will get ignored, and this may often make the minority group feel separated from the state. So let's do one more. The third point is no accountability. This is basically touching on the first point, and is saying if an official does do something that is not in the best interest of society, or does not fulfill any promises, there's no repercussions that will happen to them. There's nothing to stop a leader from doing anything that is considered to be wrong. Now that I've went through a democracy, let's consider another popular system of government, and that is a dictatorship. A dictatorship is a state that is fully controlled by a ruler or a single political entity. Some words that run synonymous to a dictatorship is totalitarianism, authoritarianism, autocracy, undemocratic rule, and tyranny. Dictators have been around for thousands of years and are still relevant today. Let's consider some examples of dictators throughout history. The first example is Julius Caesar. He was the dictator of Rome from 49 BC all the way to 44 BC. Another example of a dictator was Genghis Khan. He was the leader of the Mongol Empire during the 11th century. The last example is Joseph Stalin. He's pretty recent. He was the dictator of the Soviet Union, and served his time from the 1920s all the way until his death in 1953. Now, since we know what a dictatorship is, and I showed a few historical examples, let's see how many countries in the world are currently run by dictators. In the paragraph on the second line, it says that there are 49 dictatorships in the world. Right beside it in brackets, it gives the amount of countries per continent that are run by dictatorships. Here are some examples of dictators. We see Afghanistan, we see Algeria, and so on. Here are just a few more. Now, similar to what we did with a democracy, let's see the negatives of a dictatorship. I'm going to show a few seconds of a video that does exactly that. So, here.
Once in power, dictators protect their station with military action, restrictions on personal freedoms, propaganda, and even state-sponsored terrorism. Hallmark signs of an authoritarian regime include state-controlled media, rampant corruption and cronyism, and a sizable gap between the wealthy elite and the poor.
So you just heard it. Those are the negatives. After seeing the negatives of a dictatorship and the negatives of a democracy, the negatives of a dictatorship are far worse than the negatives of the democracy. Democracy is, in theory, not so bad, which makes democracy the winner. Thanks for watching.